The race for the Republican nomination to represent Kentucky's 4th District in Congress pits incumbent Thomas Massie against local attorney Todd McMurtry. We asked each of them separately a series of questions, and you will see their answers side by side as completely as possible. Each of the candidates has made the race about who is most like President Trump, but both have also made statements or done things that expose a divide between them and the president. So we asked them, which is it?
Well, for me, it's definitely, I'm aligning myself with President Trump. My opponent in this election has tried to call me the Trump hater candidate based upon some Facebook posts that I had back in about 3 years ago during the president's first year in office. And those posts were really just the result of, like many Kentuckians at the time, I was not sure if the president was going to govern as a conservative. And, after he was in office for a few months, I realized that he was going to do a fine job, that his positions on policies were consistent with mine. And so from 2017 to present, I've been a strong supporter of the president.
Well, I'm friends with Mark Meadows, the president's chief of staff, and I've got a good line of communication to the president. But you know what? I'm not a rubber stamp. I've never told anybody that I would be a rubber stamp for this president or that I would be a rubber stamp for the Republican Party. I'm one of the most independent voices in Congress, and my opponents tried to use that against me. But I think the people of Kentucky's 4th District want somebody who actually reads the bills instead of rubber stamping them.
Now, as a member of Congress, what policies would you support to address racial issues in this country, given what we've seen with how the coronavirus has affected African Americans, as well as the protests in the wake of George Floyd's death?
Well, I think there are some police reforms we could do. One thing that I would do, for instance, is to eliminate no-knock raids and the no-knock warrants. I think it puts the police officers in a dangerous situation. If there's not a loss of life involved, then I think that you can serve the warrant in the daytime or wait for the person to come out and then arrest them then. So that's one example of police reform that I would undertake that would help the police, I believe, and the individuals who've been wronged by it. I also think we've kind of over-criminalized a lot of things in this country. Instead of blaming the police, why don't we blame the politicians who write these laws and make it such that you can barely go a month without committing some kind of crime that you don't even know about. So I think we should decriminalize some of these things and look at and focus on violent crime instead of the victimless crimes.
Yeah, this is a very serious issue, and I think it requires a person that has a great capacity to listen and to take into take into consideration different people's perspectives. So, for example, as an attorney, I'm trained to be an advocate, I'm trained to be a negotiator, and I'm trained to be a mediator. And I've had a lot of experience in my legal career working for police, cities, and counties. And that experience, I think, has me well equipped to be the kind of person that can help resolve some of these problems that we have. And I think these are very significant issues, and I agree with the concerns voiced by the peaceful protesters across the country that we really need to resolve as best we can the current problems of race in our society. And we need to do that in a constructive way that can benefit everyone. So for me, you ask what would be a policy standpoint. I would first draw upon my experience in working with police officers, use of force policies and things like that, and see if we just couldn't change the use of force policies, make those more national in character, so everybody would be operating from a very similar playbook, and that would prevent something like a chokehold or different types of use of force from being allowed at all. And I think that would do a lot to really resolve this issue.
Do you believe police reforms are necessary? And if so, what reforms do you support?
Well, as I said, I do believe that police reforms are necessary. We've seen recently the situation in Atlanta, which seemed to be a completely unnecessary use of force under those circumstances, or excessive. And so I would definitely lean on policies that would train police officers to avoid use of force in only the most rare circumstances would they be able to use force. So that's my view on that question.
Well, I think we should reform the federal program that sends military equipment to local police departments. I think it's a great idea to send sort of the the bulletproof vests, they call them sometimes, and the handguns, but I don't think we need to send things that look like tanks to the police department. So at the federal level, I would reform that program. And as I said before, I think we should try to eliminate the no-knock warrants and the no-knock raids, but that's really a local decision, not a federal decision. Those are a couple of the police reforms that I support.
Senator Paul is pushing to ban no-knock warrants for federal agencies, so do you support that push?
Yeah, we should ban no-knock warrants for the FBI and the ATF. I think it's unnecessary.
Well, that's a great question. I really do not support that. I have and there's a close relationship between Senator Paul and my opponent in this election, and they both came to the same conclusion that they would want to ban no-knock warrants. And to me, that's just a pattern of making quick decisions without really doing the necessary study before making a decision like that. And I've cataloged a lot of these issues on my website, which is massiemistakes.com, which literally goes over hundreds of circumstances where my opponent has voted in a way that has either been against the best wishes of the president, has been in opposition to the president's policies, and has also proven him to be one of the least effective members of Congress. So to answer your question about do I support a ban on no-knocks, I do not, because I also served on the federal grand jury in Covington last year, and I spent a year seeing how active cartel drug dealers are in the state. And I feel that there may be circumstances, very limited, where police need an advantage if they're going up against organized crime or something like that. So I think that we would have to greatly curtail the use of those and make it only in rare circumstances, but I do still support them and would oppose Senator Paul's effort to eliminate them.
Now, as you know, the deficit has grown significantly. We're heading toward a record. How do you plan to address this as a member of Congress?
Well, first off, as I mentioned before, my opponent in this election is you can go on the internet and search on the issue of legislative effectiveness, and he is the least effective Republican in Washington, or one of just a handful of least effective Republicans in Washington, completely unable to get anything done for our country. So what I would do is begin by putting in office a person who has proven to be effective. In my career as an attorney, nearly 30 years in Northern Kentucky, representing all types of small businesses and all types of people in government agencies. So I would use that record of effectiveness to be effective in Washington. And with regard to the issue of the deficit, I think the main thing that we need to look at is we need to be able to build up our jobs, get back to where we were before the coronavirus, and further along the road, we need to increase our productivity as a nation so that we can have greater amounts of economic progress and economic development that will then generate higher taxes, or higher tax revenues. So I would look to that. I think another policy that we could look at is reforming immigration. I would be in favor of building the wall, but also expanding legal immigration. Interestingly, my opponent in this election has gone against the president's wishes and voted against efforts to build the wall on our southern border, which is not helpful to our cause, because I think what we need to do is have legal immigration. We need to bring people into the country that love our country and that are going to be productive citizens, that are going to build businesses and do work for our great corporations, and thereby increase taxes, which will then allow the government to reduce the deficit.
Well, some people have called me Mr. No because they say I vote no too frequently on the spending bills. My response to that is, if you see that we're not spending enough money, I'll ease up on the no button on these spending bills. I have consistently voted against bloated budgets. I've never voted for an omnibus, and I've never voted for a debt limit increase. Some people say that's extreme, but what I think is extreme is bankrupting our children and mortgaging our country to other countries.
And what will you do to put the wheels in motion to get a replacement for the Brent Spence Bridge? What are you going to do to make that closer to a reality?
Well, this week I spent in Washington, D.C., even though the House wasn't in session. I was in the Transportation Committee marking up the next transportation bill. This is the bill that's responsible for all federal spending for roads and bridges. We do not have earmarks. So anybody that promises you in an election that they will go up there and earmark a bridge project doesn't understand the process as it exists now. But one of the things that I worked with my chairman on in the last Congress was getting a transportation bill that designated special money for freight corridors, national freight corridors. And we got I-71 and the I-75 corridor there in northern Kentucky designated as a freight corridor. We've already started to see some of the money from that program come to projects on I-71 and I-75.
My record of accomplishments as an attorney, being the president of the Northern Kentucky Bar Association, serving on the state board of governors for the Bar Association, being city attorney for 3 cities in Kentucky. I've done a lot of public development projects, tax development projects, where I've helped bring businesses and public infrastructure into my cities where I've worked as the city attorney. And interestingly, my opponent in this election got into office claiming that he was going to help solve the Brent Spence Bridge problem. But if you go to MassieMistakes.com, you'll see that his oddball votes, where he's the one member out of 435 to vote no on something like the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, or vote no on something like the Farm Bill, the lone standout in all of Congress, he's rendered himself completely ineffective and unable to do anything productive for the people in Kentucky. So I would start by not behaving in that way, being more of an influencer, gaining influence, and using that influence to then speak with the legislatures in Ohio and Kentucky, and to work with the congressmen in this area to get the bridge done. And I think it's vitally important. The person that we have in there now has zero capacity to get it done. I'll be different.
Our thanks to Mr. Massie and Mr. McMurtry for joining us. The winner of this race will face either Shannon Fabert or Alexandra Owensby, who are vying for the Democratic nomination. Kentucky voters who already have their mail-in ballots must have them postmarked on or before Tuesday for their votes to count. You can vote in person at your county clerk's office on Monday. That will keep you from avoiding what will likely be long lines on Tuesday, since there will only be one polling place open per county because of COVID-19. I'm Angenette Levy, Local 12 News.